All right, hi guys. So we're gonna talk now about World War II and how it kind of started. Last week you should have been reading about what was going on in Europe and Asia in the 1930s and some of these dictators rising to power. Now we're going to talk about how the war actually starts. So Neville Chamberlain, he was the Prime Minister of Great Britain um, before World War II started, and he and many other European leaders had a policy of appeasement. This meant basically giving in to the aggressive demands of Hitler's and others just to maintain peace, right? Because they had just had World War I, and so continually when Hitler and other European dictators like Mussolini in Italy, when they were doing aggressive things that were kind of violating the Treaty of Versailles or just like not good actions, instead of um, fighting them and actually putting pressure on these countries, they just appeased them, meaning give in to them and hopefully those leaders won't keep doing those things. Um, Winston Churchill, who becomes the prime minister during the war, or right around when the war starts, he condemned Chamberlain's policy of appeasement and said it would only lead to war and increase the power of these dictators. Obviously, we know that Churchill was correct, and Neville Chamberlain was wrong because Hitler was not appeased. Here you can see a political cartoon, and it's showing Hitler basically um, making fun of these leaders in Europe while he continues to gain power. So, like the first little stair here says rearmament. The second one, I can't read what that says. This one says the Danzig. Basically it's showing that he's taking more land, and basically the leaders around the world aren't really doing anything to stop him. So the end of that Rise of Dictators reading from last week, we talked about, or in the reading it talked about some of the violations of the Treaty of Versailles that Hitler did. So I'm just going to review those again real quick. So remember, Hitler basically views Aryans or German people of German ethnicity as like the superior race and felt that basically everyone else was inferior. And he wanted to create what he called a more living space for the Germans in Europe. And specifically, he said that like they deserved to have like this huge German empire. So first thing he did was he built up the German military, and for a while he did this in secret. Actually, most of the facilities that were building military weapons were disguised as schools, actually, so that they could continue to build weapons without getting caught. Eventually, it comes out that he's building weapons and he's not secretive about it. He also sends troops into the Rhineland. The Rhineland was basically this area between Germany and France, kind of like a border zone that after World War I in the Treaty of Versailles, Germans had to leave this area and they couldn't have military there and they couldn't use all the like industrial factories and stuff there. So he's re-putting troops there along this border between France and Germany. Next, he annexed or added Austria to Germany. So he took Austria over and made them part of Germany. And he basically said, well, I should be able to do this because most people in Austria are like ethnic Germans or Aryans, so which is true, but Austria didn't want to be added to Germany. They resisted, but couldn't really fight back. Soon after, Hitler and Germany added the Sudetenland, which was part of Czechoslovakia. This part of Czechoslovakia was also mainly German or Aryan by ethnicity, which is why he was kind of getting away with it. Then this was kind of seen as unsettling, and so Great Britain, Germany, and France and Italy met in Berlin, Germany, or sorry, not Berlin, in Munich, and at this Munich agreement, basically the other countries allowed Germany to take over the Sudetenland part of Czechoslovakia. As long as they didn't take over more, and basically saying, as long as this is it, you can take this, which of course the people of Czechoslovakia were not given any options when Hitler took this place over, and they signed this Munich Agreement. So you are going to be adding stuff to your map. Here you can see, so in red, this was what Germany was before they started expanding. This border zone between Germany and France, the Rhineland, that's where he put the military there again and kind of took it back over for Germany. This is Austria. Austria, after World War I, got a lot smaller. It wasn't big anymore. It was smaller, but he took over Austria. Then he took over, this long skinny country is all Czechoslovakia. So he took over just the yellow part that had mostly Germans in 1938, and then later in 1938 he took over the rest of Czechoslovakia, so the rest of this gray right here where my mouse is. So on your assignment, if you scroll down on it, the one that you should have opened in Notability, there's a European map and there's a map that's showing more of the Pacific Ocean and Asia. So you're going to be adding dates and names and stuff to those maps throughout this PowerPoint. So you need to make sure that if I'm telling you to add something to your map, that you go to the map and add that year or that date. So you are going to put just the dates for the following events in the correct location on your map. So you don't have to name all these, like takes over Austria, takes over the Sudetenland. You just need to put the year, which is bolded. So in 1936, Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland. In 1938, he took over Austria. In 1938, he also took over the Sudetenland, which is part of Czechoslovakia. And then in 1939, he took over, I guess it wasn't at the end of 1938. I guess it was at the beginning of 1939. He took over the rest of Czechoslovakia. So I'm going to show you, this is what your map looks like. And I'm going to show you with my mouse where you should be, or maybe I can write on it. We'll try this, laser pointer. Okay, so here's Germany, right? So you're going to put 1936, like right around this area, because that's when this is the Rhineland right here, that's when he remilitarized it. Okay, here is Austria, right here, so you're going to put, if you look here, 1938 for Austria. So for Austria, you're going to put 1938 right there. You can see here is Czechoslovakia, and he took over just this part right here of Czechoslovakia in 1938 as well. Okay, but then you see you have a fourth one to add, so you got to put the year 1939 somewhere else in Czechoslovakia, maybe where you see the Slovakia. If you don't have room for some reason or something, or it's not showing up well on Notability, you can draw like a line to it, but it would be better to put the year right where it is. Okay, so if you need to go back and like pause so you can figure it all out, go for it. Otherwise, just rewind and rewatch where I was pointing to for the different years. Now, some other things that Hitler did. So we talked about in 1939 he took over the rest of Czechoslovakia, and Czechoslovakia couldn't really put up a fight. And this is when Neville Chamberlain, the leader or prime minister of Great Britain, this is when he finally realized, like, yeah, this policy of appeasement kind of sucks and it's not working. And Hitler's going to continue to take over more things, and he can't really be trusted because he just broke the Munich Agreement not even a year after we signed it. Some other things that were not necessarily breaking the Treaty of Versailles. Well, this pact with Italy was breaking the Treaty of Versailles, but just other things in general that were not good actions. So Germany and Italy were both fascist dictatorships, so they're similar political ideologies. And so Hitler and Mussolini formed a alliance or pact. Hitler actually got a lot of his ideas from Benito Mussolini, who was the dictator of Italy, and he kind of watched what Benito Mussolini did in Italy and copied him in Germany. So he kind of Hitler looked up to Mussolini. Germany, though, also established a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union and Joseph Stalin, who was the dictator of the Soviet Union. Now, this was surprising to most of the world because basically everyone knew that Stalin and Hitler, even though in many ways they had similarities, like they're both dictators, they would crush their enemies, that kind of thing, they were opposite ends of the political spectrum. So, like, Stalin and the Soviet Union is communist, and so that's at one end of this spectrum, versus fascism is at the complete other end. And so it was surprising that they were willing to sign this non aggression pact. The non aggression pact here basically said this, that Joseph Stalin agreed that if Hitler continued to expand, he would not stop Hitler's expansion, and Hitler agreed, whatever I'm attacking, I won't attack you, Soviet Union. And so this means when World War II starts, that Joseph Stalin and Russia are not going to join the war because they've already, with this non-aggression pact, they've agreed that they're not going to attack or fight Germany. So the last kind of thing that happens that then is the start of World War II is that Hitler invades Poland on September 1st, 1939, and this is the start of World War II, where other European countries finally declare war and say, like, Hitler needs to be stopped. Now, the German military used something called blitzkrieg, or lightning war. If you think of lightning, right, it's very quick and powerful, and so that's kind of the idea behind this strategy, is it's very quick and efficient. And it was what allowed them to take over not most, but a lot of European countries very, very quickly. And so the strategy combined a few things. First, they would attack with planes and bomb like cities or areas that they were going to try to conquer, and kind of do a lot of the dirty work with their airplanes way up high. Then they'd move in with armored tanks to do further damage and further shooting and bombs and all that, followed by foot soldiers after that. And basically the foot soldiers didn't have a ton to do left because through the air attacks and the armored tanks, they had kind of already got the people in that area to surrender. So Poland fought back basically to no avail, meaning they didn't fight back very successfully, and within a month, Poland was basically in German hands. So in less than a month, Germany took over a whole entire country. The other thing, though, to note is that part of this non-aggression pact was that the Soviet Union, right, who's led by Stalin, and Germany, who's led by Hitler, they agreed in this non-aggression pact that they would split up Poland. And so Soviet Union used to control part of what's Poland today, and so did Germany before World War I ended. Poland became a country after World War I, and so they're basically, both these countries are taking back land that they feel like should still be part of theirs. And so part of the non-aggression pact is they kind of said, like, I'll take this part of Poland and you can take that part of Poland. So you can just see tanks here. Now German forces are going to turn to the west. So they took over Poland in the east, and now they're going to turn west and they're going to take over others. So right after Hitler and Germany invaded Poland in September, Great Britain and France finally declared war on Germany. Great Britain, France, later on the Soviet Union, the U.S., China, Canada, among various others. There's lots of others. They all became known as the Allies. So it's the same, if it helps you remember, most of the allies in World War I are also the allies in World War II. Not all the same countries, but a lot of them. So if you think of Great Britain, France, and the U.S., they're still called the allies in World War II. Later on, the Soviet Union also joins the allies, just like the Soviet Union was part of the allies in World War I. Canada and China were also part of the allies in World War I and also in World War II. So the Allies believed that Germany's army would grow weak, specifically when it tried to invade France, which was probably the most powerful country they're going to start to go up against soon. And so instead of being very offensive in their attack and pushing Germany back into Germany, they assumed Germany would kind of wear itself out when they continued to try to invade more places. And so they, in general, the Allies are maintaining more of a defensive strategy, so they're not trying to move forward, they're just trying to hold their lines. So there's kind of a little break where, because of winter, they're not doing as much. So if you look between September and April, there's not a ton that Hitler is trying to invade and take over. Then in April of 1940, he really starts moving again. He invades and takes over Norway and Denmark. This specifically because he wants more access to the ocean. for trade. And then by the beginning of June, he had also conquered the Netherlands and Belgium. Here you can see where they're going to go into France. At this point, he had already conquered Denmark's up here, Norway's off the screen, the Netherlands, Belgium, and then last is going to be France. So for France, Germans unexpectedly invaded France through the Ardennes forest, which wasn't expected because it wasn't as easy to move through for troops and stuff. It wasn't like just walking across the field. And so part of the reason is they didn't assume they'd be there. It was also not the normal, typical border between France and Germany. It was the border between Belgium and France. So that was kind of surprising. So the French army concentrated their defenses somewhere else, not along the Ardennes forest. They called it the Maginot Line, which was south of this area. And so when Germany first entered France, they got really far in really quickly, and by the end of June, France had also surrendered. Now, part of France didn't have to surrender because they basically said they'd work with the Germans and cooperate with the German government and stuff. And so this was known as Vichy France. Basically, this part of France was like controlled, a little part of France controlled by, well, still by French people, but it was basically a puppet government. So Germany really controlled it, but they were agreeing they'd work with Germany. So technically in name, they were still independent. The rest of France that wouldn't surrender and wouldn't agree to Germany and Hitler, they were occupied by force, by like military in France. Many French leaders basically escaped to Great Britain. That would include their leader, Charles de Gaulle. They went to Great Britain basically to organize resistance there. And they're also going to fight back against Vichy control of France, which was like loyal to Germany. So here's the ironic part. So here's again where the border between France and France and Germany is, right? And this is the line where most French troops were hanging out, okay? But here, right here, is where Germany went through. So they went through Belgium through this forest and then went into this kind of weaker area where there weren't as many French troops. Now the ironic thing is that if this looks at all familiar to you, like where Germany's entering, this is like almost exactly where Germany entered for World War I. So in World War I, when Germany first declared war and is going to attack France, they enter through Belgium and have this surprise attack because there was less fortifications here. And yet they do the very similar thing in World War II, and yet France still hasn't learned its lesson. So I just always find it weird, like, why did France not put more troops here where Germany had invaded in World War I? I mean, maybe just because they assume, why would Germany do the exact same thing 20 years later? I don't know, because it works. And here it's just showing how Germany is expanding kind of every which way between the start of World War I, 1939, and 1942. So we're going to add the following to your map. And you're just going to add those years in the right places. So Poland is the only one that's in 1939. The rest of these countries, so Norway, Denmark, Netherlands, Belgium, and France, were all taken over in 1940, and you don't need to be specific on months. So I'm going to go walk through these on the map on the next page, so I'll tell you the years again. Okay, so here you can see Poland. Here's Poland. You're going to put 1939 there. The rest now are going to be 1940. So you can see the little tip of Norway right here. That's 1940. And Denmark is also 1940. So these are were both taken over in like April, May of 1940. Then Germany goes this way. They took over the Netherlands and Belgium, also in 1940. This is like in May and June of 1940. And then France is also 1940. Now you can see that between Italy and Germany, they do take over these other places here and parts of northern Africa. That's a little later on in the war, and not quite as significant when you think of the Allies and who really does a lot of the fighting. A lot of this fighting will be here. And so we're not going to talk as much about some of these other countries in Northern Africa. But for sure, the Axis powers do gain parts of other parts of the world, because you can see this is the red is maximum area of Axis occupation. Now, really, the only country fighting Hitler and the Axis powers left in Europe is Great Britain. So this is the strategy of Hitler to take over Britain, which is the last major power he's trying to defeat that's fighting him, is that he's trying to destroy Britain's Air Force. Because if he can destroy the Air Force, he basically has them landed or grounded, and then he can take Germany, or Hitler can practice their blitzkrieg and quickly take over Great Britain, because Great Britain at this point did have a pretty good air force. But thanks to new technology, so radar, the British were able to detect before German aircraft got there, and they were able to fight them off and destroy many German aircraft, versus without radar, they wouldn't know that German aircraft was coming, or they wouldn't have enough time, and so a lot of their planes would have been destroyed. A lot of British planes would have been destroyed. Thankfully, though, because of radar, they were able to detect when German planes were coming. The other part, though, of Hitler's strategy was to terrorize civilians in order to destroy public morale for the war. So basically, he's trying to make war so miserable for everyday people in Great Britain that they'll basically be like, we're sick of this, we can't keep fighting, let's surrender. Because, right, if basically everyone in your country is saying, we need to surrender, we need to just give up, then it's going to be really hard for your country to keep fighting. And so specifically, Hitler targeted London and other big cities and bombed them. And over the course of this time, when he's bombing Great Britain, thousands of civilians died. Winston Churchill, in response to Hitler attacking them, he has this speech that's probably one of the most famous speeches in the world. And one of the famous lines from it is he says, "We shall defend our island," meaning Great Britain, at whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on our beaches, on our landing grounds, in fields, in streets, and on the hills. We shall never surrender. And there's much more to it. It's a very, very, very famous speech. If you want to watch it, I'm sure there's various clips on YouTube. And so they keep fighting and they don't surrender, thanks to the leadership of Winston Churchill and the fact that people in Great Britain, they don't lose their morale even though they're being bombed. And so near the end of 1940, Hitler basically realizes, this isn't working, I'm going to call off my invasion and regroup and figure this out. Here you can see actual pictures of London being bombed. And so what this is showing you is, again, at the height of Axis power, these are all the areas that they controlled in blue. And then the red are Soviet Union later on, but the red are showing you countries that were loyal to the Allies. Now, why does the Soviet Union, right? They signed this non-aggression pact. So the question is, why does the Soviet Union later join the Allies? So the Soviet Union, like I just said, had signed this non-aggression pact, meaning they're not going to fight with Germany. And they basically had followed through, and the Soviet Union had stayed neutral and not taken a side during the war. But then Hitler, when he can't take over Britain, right, he's kind of power hungry, he's looking for where he's going to go next. Even though Britain didn't work, he's going to take a break and figure something else out. He then turns back east and invades the whole entire Soviet Union. That's all of Russia, and even more than what the current modern-day country of Russia is. And so that's actually, right, there's kind of a break between the winter of 1940 to 41, and then in June of 1941, once the Soviet Union is invaded by Germany, that's when the Soviet Union joins the Allies and starts to fight off the Axis powers, which is mainly, at this point, Japan, Germany, and Italy. Those are the Axis powers. And so it was kind of this idea that I don't remember who said this, but I think it might have been our president or maybe it was Winston Churchill. But it says the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so the idea is it's not like the U.S. and Great Britain or the U.K. liked the Soviet Union or liked Stalin. But basically, they all had a common enemy, and that common enemy that was of bigger concern at the moment was Germany. So the U.S. and Great Britain were willing to work with Stalin in the Soviet Union because Germany at this point is the greater threat. So Operation Barbarossa in June of 1941, this was when Germany starts to now attack and try to take over the Soviet Union. So you're going to add Operation Barbarossa to your map. You're going to just put the name, Operation Barbarossa, June 1941. And so you're going to find Poland and put that there. So Germany's here, Poland, and then Poland was taken over in 1939. Then kind of along the border between Poland and the USSR or the Soviet Union, you're going to put Operation Barbarossa and then June 1941. Yep, we already added Barbarossa. The other thing is just somewhere on your map. It doesn't have to be like on the actual colored part of the map, but you need to put that the Soviet Union joins the Allies in June of 1941. Okay, so somewhere on your map, or it doesn't even need to be on this part of the map, you need to add again that Russia or the Soviet Union joins the war in June of 1941. Then we've got two more to add, and this one you're going to add on that different map on the war in the Pacific. So you're going to put 1937 in China, because that's when Japan declares war on China. Or actually, you're going to put, you can just put it on China, 1937. And then Japan starts to try to take over Indochina and attacks Indochina in 1941. So you're going to put those two dates. Indochina doesn't exist anymore. It's several countries. So somewhere in China here, you need to put 1937, because that's when they start to try to take over China. And you can see that by 1942, they had taken over big chunks of China here. Then for Indochina, it's down here. You're going to put 1941, somewhere around here. Indochina now is like Cambodia and Laos and one other country, I forget. So Indochina is here. You can see that at the height of its power, Japan controlled all this area. You can see it in red here, this red line. That's showing you the height of what Japan had controlled or gained power over in 1942. That was the height of how much they controlled in the Pacific. Now, we're going to pause here, and I'm going to give you a little break, and then we'll do part two.